Hi, I'm Shashak Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about how well the opposition alliance is sticking together and the controversies it has been dealing with. We also talk about the new proceedings starting in the new Parliament building. But first, we talk about the serious and concerning accusations that Canada has made against the Indian government. Earlier this year, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, one of the most wanted terrorists in India and the head of the separatist organization Khalistan Tiger Force, was killed in Canada. Nijjar, who was 46 years old, was shot dead by two unidentified men in the Canadian province of British Columbia. Now yesterday, more than 3 months later, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, in a statement to his country's parliament, said that the Indian government had a potential link in the killing of the Khalistani leader.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. It is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open, and democratic societies conduct themselves. As you would expect, we've been working closely and coordinating with our allies on this very serious matter. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter. I also expect it to reiterate that...
After this statement, Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly also said that as a consequence of these possible links, the country had expelled the head of Indian intelligence in Canada. Now, India in response rejected these claims, calling them absurd and motivated, and in retaliation expelled a senior Canadian diplomat. These latest developments, which have dramatically escalated tensions, come at a time when the relations between the two countries had already been strained for months. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's diplomatic editor, Shubhajit Roy, about the situation. Shubhajit, could you put these allegations into context for our listeners? How serious are they in the realm of geopolitics?
Well, when a head of government of a country makes an allegation that a foreign government is involved in a killing of a citizen on its soil, then it is definitely a very serious charge. Now, as you know, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he has made this explosive allegation where he has essentially linked the Indian government, security agencies, intelligence agencies, with the killing of a Pro-khalistan leader in Canada. And the Pro-khalistan leader, he was killed in June this year, and an investigation was on in Canada. And Canada now says that they have found a potential link, and they are actively pursuing the potential link between Indian government and the killing of this Pro-khalistan leader. Now, obviously, India has responded very sharply and very strongly, and it has said that it's motivated and absurd.
Right, and we also saw both sides expelling a diplomat each, starting with Canada, of course. But Shubhajit, the fact that Trudeau said this publicly really stands out. One imagines that these conversations would have idly taken place in private between the leaders. So tell us, when Trudeau had visited Delhi for G20 earlier this month, was this issue discussed between the two countries?
Well, that's what Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, he has said in his parliament in the speech, that he did raise it with Prime Minister Modi directly. And so we have to take that word for it. And the Indian government has also confirmed that it was raised and it was rejected there as well. So, and if you remember, at that point of time, after the meeting, India had issued a statement. In their readout, it had specified that, how the Prime Minister had conveyed his concerns about pro-Khalistan groups operating out of in Canada. So these separatist movement or these tendencies, he had talked about those with the Canadian Prime Minister. So it was a very sharp conversation, at least the readout. That's what suggested. Back then, the Canadian readout did not mention at that point of time about any such conversation. But now we know that that conversation did take place.
Right, and days after their meeting in G20, the two countries put a pause to their negotiations on a bilateral free trade agreement. Was that a possible result of a meeting that did not go as well as everyone would have hoped?
Well, actually, there were reports even before Prime Minister Trudeau he came to India that the Canadian side has sought for a pause in the trade negotiations. And after the meeting in the last few days, the Indian side has also confirmed that there has indeed been a pause because of the situation or the relationship having taken a hit. Obviously, the governments between them, they knew that this was coming. So they would have sort of put a pause on this particular trade negotiations because of the setback that has happened, that the relationship has suffered because of these allegations.
And Shubhajit, we understand that things have remained frosty between the two countries for months now over this very issue, over the Khalistani movement in Canada that demands a separate state for the Sikh community. Could you tell us about that a bit? How long has this been going on for?
Well, it has a very long history of about at least 40 years, since the 80s when the Khalistan movement was and the Sikh militancy in India was at its peak. At that point of time as well, there was a lot of traction in Canada and the Pro-khalistan groups were very active. In recent years, we have seen this come up again. So, for example, whenever the Sikh referendum issue happened in the last few years, the pro-Khalistan groups in different parts of the world, Canada included, also in UK, or US and Australia or Germany, wherever there is a substantial Sikh diaspora, this referendum has been a pain point. And in Canada, more so because also they have a pretty large number, also a high level of political influence in the system. So that has cast a shadow in the Canadian society.
Right, and these tensions, of course, have played out even during Justin Trudeau's tenure. Could you share some notable examples from this period?
Well, if you remember, in February 2018, when Prime Minister Trudeau made his visit along with his family, the famous pictures of him in Indian attire with his family coming to India for a week-long trip, that was also actually marred by one such incident where a pro-Khalistan figure who was convicted of attempt to murder of a Punjab minister was seen in one of the receptions for the Canadian Prime Minister in Mumbai. And then he was also invited in a Delhi reception where then obviously, because once the news came out, information came out, the invitation was withdrawn back then. So, and we saw it ended in a very frosty note, to say the least, at that point of time. And that is in 2018 I'm talking about. And then in 2020, when the farm protests were on, the Canadian Prime Minister made a statement which indicated some sort of a support to this agitation because there were Sikh groups in Canada. And then that was also didn't go down well with the Indian government here. So Indian government obviously responded very sharply. And most recently, I think July this year, if I remember correctly, when after this pro-Khalistan leaders killing, in Canada and in US, UK, Germany, the posters came out, in Canada included, where the Indian High Commissioner's photographs and Indian Consul General's photographs were published in posters where they were sort of marked out as killers of these pro-Khalistan leaders. That again was seen as a sort of an attack or incitement of violence against Indian diplomats. That was again taken very strongly by India with the Canadian authorities, as it was taken with the American, the British, Australian authorities. So as you can see, over the decades, and especially in the last few years with Trudeau government in power, this issue of Khalistan has been a pain point, has been a sore point between the two countries. And this particular latest revelation or latest allegation is a continuation in that series of sort of setbacks that the ties have suffered in the last few years.
Right, and Shubhajit, talking about these latest accusations, both the US and the UK have reacted to Justin Trudeau's comments. Could you tell us about what they have said?
Well, they've all expressed sort of concern at these allegations, but obviously nobody has said anything beyond that. So we'll have to see what are the level of nature of evidence that Canada is able to provide, and about linking Indian government to the assassination or the killing of this pro-Khalistan leader. And, depending on that, India would take a call. What is the next step forward?
And Shubhajit, in 2022, India was Canada's 10th largest trading partner. India's total exports to Canada added up to $4 billion last year. And India has also been the largest source of international students in Canada. And as we speak, a lot of aspirants, educational consultants, and Canadian PR applicants, for example, are worried if all this will affect their chances. Could you speak to these concerns and whether the current trade or people-to-people relations could get affected because of all this?
Yeah, it's a very multi-pronged relationship. As you rightly pointed out, people-to-people contact, economic contact is very high between India and Canada. So a souring of relationship, especially in the wake of allegations like this, has a very high potential of damaging the relationship and affecting the relationship in many ways. So we have to see if there are any measures which are taken by either side when it might affect the Indian students or Indian business or Canadian tourists or Canadian business. So if that happens, that is the biggest sort of challenge for the two political establishments now, to how to navigate now in the context of these allegations, which are extremely serious in nature. And so one would have to wait and see how that plays out.
And Shubhajit, just talking about this issue as a whole, could you tell us what India hopes Canada would do about the Khalistani movement there? And how does Canada view these demands and concerns?
Well, India's main core demand is that, if anyone is making any statements or has ideas or thinking of hampering India's interests, as a friendly government, as a partner, you should be responsive and sensitive to that, and you should take action against those people. So it expects Canadian government to take action against these pro-Khalistan elements, figures, groups. Canada obviously always maintains that it's a free society and there's a freedom of speech. These protests are peaceful in nature. So it doesn't see them as threatening Indian government or Indian society. But the truth lies somewhere in between. As we know that if these elements sort of harm Indian embassies or target Indian diplomats by naming them in posters, it does pose a threat. But only making statements, for example, or shouting slogans doesn't always may not be seen as against Indian interests. So there is a sort of a gray area there. So I think the issue is that both sides have to talk to each other on what are the red lines and what is the red line beyond which Canada needs to take action, and what should be the reasonable red line. That I think Canada has to convey that to the Indian side.
And next we talk about the opposition alliance. It has now been nearly 3 months since 26 opposition parties came together to contest the upcoming Lok Sabha polls, all in an attempt to defeat the BJP. Initially, when they had formed an alliance, which is now called India, there were doubts about whether they would be able to stick together. And while these doubts still remain, Indian Express's Manoj CG, who reports on the opposition for the paper, says that at least so far, all of them are sticking together fairly well.
There are parties in some of the states who have been fighting against each other, have a long history of fighting against each other, of course, in elections. And even like if you take the example of the Trinamool Congress and the CPM in West Bengal, even the history of a bloodshed as well. So in that sense, they have been sticking together fairly well. And of course, these are parties with very different ideologies, very different perspectives and worldviews. So there are bound to be tensions. But if you see, since the first meeting of the India bloc in Patna, the second one in Bengaluru and the third one in Mumbai, in that sense, we have seen less contradictions so far.
He says that this is because most of them have the view that come what may, they will have to stick together to fight against the BJP.
So it's a majorly anti-BJP driven gel that is keeping them united.
Now it seems that so far they have managed to remain united even when faced with issues on which they don't see eye to eye, or in situations where it might appear that some individuals have more decision-making power than the others. Here, Manoj gives the example of what happened during their second meeting in Bengaluru.
The backstory then was that senior Congress leader Rahul Gandhi wanted the alliance to be named India, and he perhaps, through one of his senior leaders, reached out to the Trinamool Congress on the eve of the meeting, asking whether they were agreeable to this particular name, India. And the Trinamool agreed, and the next day, Trinamool Congress leader and West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee proposed this name at the meeting. So many of the parties felt, there was some sort of jugalbandi between the Congress and the Trinamool Congress, which was playing out, especially the left, which has been fighting the Trinamool Congress in Bengal and the Congress in Kerala. They were pretty uncomfortable. So they got into a huddle. They suggested an alternative name, which was not, agreeable to the majority of the leaders there. So this is the backstory. There was some unease in the second meeting itself.
And he says that similarly in the third meeting, the idea that the top leaders should start travelling across the country, starting with the assembly election-bound states, was proposed by the Congress and then supported by the Trinamool Congress. But this idea was shot down by Sitaram Yechuri of the CPIM.
Given that this alliance is primarily focused, at ensuring seat sharing for the Lok Sabha election, so there won't be much of a seat sharing agreement in the forthcoming assembly election. So there is every possibility of the Aam Aadmi Party, fielding some candidates against the Congress in Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan or Chhattisgarh. The CPM and the left may field a few candidates. The SP may field a few candidates. So when all the parties are in the electoral fray, he suggested it's not right to be on the same stage in Bhopal or Jaipur.
Later, when a coordination committee was formed, the CPIM initially did not announce its representative who would be part of the committee, in a way indicating their displeasure with the decision-making process. Now, it was this coordination committee that eventually took two major decisions. One was that the first joint public rally of the alliance would be held in Bhopal, and the second was the boycotting of 14 TV anchors. In an unprecedented move, the committee took the decision that none of its representatives would be participating in TV shows of 14 TV anchors, including Aman Chopra of News 18, Sudhir Chaudhary of Aaj Tak, Shiv Arur of India Today, Arnab Goswami of Republic TV, Rubika Liaquat of Bharat 24, and Navika Kumar of Times Now Navbharat. All of them were accused by the alliance of conducting hate-filled news debates.
So what essentially has happened was that apart from 12 bigger parties, many of the smaller parties were not consulted on both these decisions. So when it comes to rally, it was okay, but on a decision like boycotting 14, many of them very prominent anchors did not go down well with many of the leaders, and the CPM now has decided not to, send its representative to the coordination committee. The primary argument being, these decisions of the alliance are taken by senior leaders at the top level. It's not that a coordination committee is tasked to take such decisions, so there is no point. The coordination committee decided that the first rally will be held in Bhopal, but it was shot down by the state Congress leadership in Madhya Pradesh. So what is the point in such a mechanism? So this is one thing which has unraveled so far.
But apart from this, the other major hurdle for the alliance has been the Sanatan Dharm controversy, which was started by one of the alliance partners. Earlier this month, DMK leader Udayanithi Stalin had commented on Sanatan Dharm, which is considered by many as an alternative name for Hinduism. Stalin said that Sanatan Dharm should be abolished and that we must eradicate it just like malaria and coronavirus. And despite receiving criticism for it from the BJP and even the Prime Minister commenting on it, the DMK leader has not backed down, making it uncomfortable for many of the leaders from the Hindi heartland.
When the DMK talks about Sanatan Dharma, they are primarily viewing it from a perspective of Brahmanical Hinduism, which has been a position of the DMK for quite many years now, in fact, decades. But the parties in the Hindi heartland, they have different take on that. Most of the parties believe it's all right to talk about the inequalities in the Hindu religion or the entrenched caste system, but they don't necessarily, talk against the religion. So their argument is that you have to decouple the religion. Okay, even if you want to talk about caste system, you can focus on that, but don't paint the entire religion as some kind of a system which is perpetrating inequalities.
And he says this issue in particular has very clear electoral implications. Congress leaders told him that there was an unease in the Madhya Pradesh Congress about the alliance's first meet happening in Bhopal. And this was perhaps because of the Sanatan Dharma controversy.
Because on the stage would be perhaps DMK leader and Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin, when the Madhya Pradesh Congress is in the middle of an election battle, when both Mr. Kamal Nath, the state Congress president, and senior leader Digvijay Singh have clearly disassociated the Congress from this Sanatan Dharma controversy. They perhaps did not want this kind of a public meeting taking place. So it's electorally very difficult for the Congress and of course the parties like the Samajwadi Party or the RJD or the JDU, parties in the heartland, the Hindi heartland, where the BJP will of course, and they have already started trying to paint the India alliance as anti-Hindu. So from Sanatan Dharma, the BJP has started painting the entire alliance as anti-Hindu. They have been talking about social justice. They have been talking about caste inequalities. Their framing is different as that of the DMK. But this, when it comes to, dragging the religion into it, it is very uncomfortable for most of the parties. So a message has been given to DMK. That's what we are told, to tone down their rhetoric. But so far we haven't seen that toning down of rhetoric because the DMK comes from a completely different perspective than most of the other parties.
But even besides these controversies, one major issue that the alliance has to tackle is the matter of seat sharing. In fact, many parties have explicitly said that seat sharing is what they should be talking about. Manoj explains the challenges the parties will face in doing so.
The problems in seat sharing are primarily will be visible in 4-5 states. But tough negotiations, this hard bargaining will happen in every state. So the decision now is to go state to state. So if they have to take Punjab, so then the Aam Aadmi Party and the Congress will, at the state level and at the national level, will do the negotiations. And one of the proposals is that one of the outside Punjab parties from the India alliance can act as a mediator. Say a Trinamool Congress, one of the leaders can sit with both the Aam Aadmi Party and the Congress when the seat sharing talks happen. So that kind of a mechanism they are looking at. But when it comes to seat sharing in West Bengal, the left is very clear that there is absolutely no chance of a seat sharing with the Trinamool Congress. In Punjab, the state Congress is dead against any tie-up with the Aam Aadmi Party. There will be problems in Delhi as well, and in Kerala, both the Congress and the CPM would not like to enter into any because it has always been a straight fight between them. We'll have to see how it plays out in Uttar Pradesh, where the Samajwadi Party would be very keen to contest in most of the seats, giving just a handful to the Congress or the RLD. So the dynamics will change from state to state.
And in the end, we talk about the Indian Parliament. Yesterday, the elected members of Parliament commenced their sessions within the recently inaugurated Parliament building. Now, just one day prior, on Monday, which had been the first day of the special session, the MPs bid farewell to the old Parliament building, marking an end of an era. On this occasion, Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered a farewell speech to the historical building.
इतिहास की महत्वपूर्ण घड़ी को स्मरण करते हुए आगे बढ़ने का ये अवसर है। हम सब इस ऐतिहासिक भवन से विदा ले रहे हैं। आजादी के पहले
During his speech, the Prime Minister commended the contributions of Jawaharlal Nehru and other Prime Ministers and highlighted the evolution of Indian democracy. According to him, even though the old parliament building was planned by foreign powers, it had the sweat, efforts and money of Indians.
ये सही है, इस इमारत के निर्माण करने का निर्णय विदेशी शासकों का था, लेकिन ये बात हम न कभी भूल सकते हैं और हम गर्व से कह सकते हैं इस भवन के निर्माण में पसीना मेरे देशवासियों का लगा था.
In his speech, he also emphasized that the faith of the common man in parliament and democracy has grown over the years. Reflecting on India's democratic journey, the Prime Minister stated that the last day in this historical building should be dedicated to more than 7,500 parliamentarians, including over 600 women who have served in this building since independence. Meanwhile, the leader of the opposition in Rajya Sabha, Mallikarjun Kharge, spoke about the significance of the historic Central Hall where they had gathered. He highlighted the Central Hall's role as the venue for the sessions of the Constituent Assembly from 1946 to 1949 and paid tribute to the founding leaders of the country.
Today, we humbly recall the phenomenal contributions made by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the first President of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ji, the first Prime Minister, and architect of modern India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the first Home Minister of India, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, architect of Indian Constitution. It is also an occasion to recall with gratitude the contributions of Sri G.V. Malvankar, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, and also acknowledge the collective contribution by members of the Constituent Assembly, Provisional Parliament, and first and all subsequent Lok Sabha. This central hall was witnessed.
From yesterday, both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha started functioning from the triangle-shaped new building, which was inaugurated in May and which has been described by the Prime Minister as the reflection of the aspirations and dreams of 140 crore Indians. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashak Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.